The thunder of hooves in the distance was the only warning Penelope Garner had before the storm unleashed its fury, matching the turmoil in her heart as she clutched the small bundle closer to her chest and approached the weathered church that stood as the only beacon of hope in the desolate Wyoming landscape of 1875. The rain began to fall in heavy drops, quickly transforming into a downpour that threatened to soak through the thin blanket protecting the infant in her arms. Penelope had been traveling for days, her once fine dress now tattered and mudded, her boots worn through at the soles. She was exhausted, hungry, and desperate. The baby, only 2 months old, had been fussing for hours, and Penelope knew she needed to find shelter soon. The church looked abandoned, its white paint peeling from years of harsh weather, but the small cross atop its steeple gave her hope. Perhaps there would be someone inside who could help her, a kindly pastor or a church caretaker who wouldn't ask too many questions. She needed just one night of safety before continuing her journey westward, away from the men who were hunting her. With trembling fingers, Penelope knocked on the heavy wooden door, praying silently that someone would answer. The wind whipped around her, plastering her damp dress to her body and sending shivers down her spine. The baby began to cry again, its tiny wails nearly lost in the howling storm. Inside the church, Owen Finley tensed at the sound of knocking. He wasn't expecting company, especially not during a storm like this. He had been hiding out in the abandoned church for 3 days, nursing a bullet wound in his shoulder and waiting for his pursuers to give up the chase. The small town of Redemption was the last place anyone would think to look for him, a notorious outlaw with a price on his head. Owen grabbed his revolver and approached the door cautiously. He had learned the hard way that trusting strangers often led to trouble. But as the knocking continued, more desperate now, he heard something that made him pause, the unmistakable cry of a baby. Curiosity won out over caution. He tucked his gun into his holster and pulled open the door, revealing a young woman drenched from the rain, clutching a small bundle to her chest. Her wide, frightened eyes met his, and for a moment they both stood frozen in surprise. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm, "we need shelter." Owen hesitated only a moment before stepping aside to let her in. Outlaw or not, he couldn't turn away a woman and child during a storm like this. As she stepped into the dim light of the church, he got a better look at her face, delicate features framed by dark hair that had escaped from what was once an elegant updo. She couldn't have been more than 25, but there was a weariness in her eyes that spoke of hardship beyond her years. "Thank you," she said, her shoulders sagging with relief as the door closed behind her, shutting out the worst of the wind and rain. "What are you doing out in weather like this?" Owen asked, his voice gruff from disuse. "Especially with a little one." The woman clutched the baby tighter, as if afraid he might try to take it from her. "We had nowhere else to go," she replied simply. Owen nodded, understanding all too well what it meant to be without options. "There's a small room in the back with a cot. It's not much, but it's dry. You can stay there tonight." The woman's eyes filled with grateful tears. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Finley," he supplied after a brief hesitation. "Owen Finley. And you are?" "Penelope Garner," she replied, then looked down at the bundle in her arms. "And this is Kyle." The baby had quieted now, seemingly comforted by the dryness and warmth of the church. Owen caught a glimpse of a tiny face peeking out from the blanket, rosy cheeks and a tuft of dark hair. "Follow me," he said, leading her toward the back of the church. As they walked down the aisle between the pews, Penelope noticed that Owen moved with a slight limp, favoring his right side. There was a dark stain on his shirt near his left shoulder that looked suspiciously like blood. "You're hurt," she observed. Owen's hand instinctively moved to cover the wound. "It's nothing," he said dismissively. "Just a scratch," but Penelope had spent enough time around injured men to know when a wound was serious. Her late father had been a doctor, and she had often assisted him in treating patients. "That's more than a scratch, Mr. Finley. It needs proper attention." Owen led her into a small back room that had once served as the pastor's study. A narrow cot stood against one wall, and a rickety table with a single chair occupied the center of the room. A few candle stubs provided the only light. "You and the little one can stay here," he said, ignoring her comment about his injury. "I'll be in the main church if you need anything," but Penelope wasn't so easily deterred. She had spent too long being meek and obedient, and it had nearly cost her everything. "Please, let me look at your wound. It's the least I can do to repay your kindness." Owen studied her for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether he could trust her. Finally, he nodded once. "After you've settled in and seen to the baby." Penelope laid Kyle gently on the cot and unwrapped him from his damp blanket. To her relief, he was still dry underneath, thanks to the multiple layers she had bundled him in. He blinked up at her with trusting eyes, his tiny fists waving in the air. "He's a handsome little fellow," Owen remarked from the doorway, where he had been watching them. Penelope smiled, the first genuine smile she had managed in weeks. "Yes, he is. He's been very brave through all of this." "How old is he?" "Just over 2 months." Owen nodded, a strange expression crossing his face. "I'll get you some water to clean up. There's a pump out back." While he was gone, Penelope changed Kyle's diaper using one of the few clean cloths she had left in her small bag. She was down to her last bottle of milk, carefully rationed and kept as cool as possible. As she fed Kyle, she wondered what she would do when the milk ran out. She had been so focused on escaping that she hadn't planned beyond finding temporary safety. Owen returned with a bucket of water and placed it on the table. "It's not warm, I'm afraid." "It's perfect, thank you." Penelope finished feeding Kyle and gently laid him on the cot, surrounding him with the remaining dry blankets to prevent him from rolling off. He was already drifting to sleep, his eyelids growing heavy. "Now," she said, turning to Owen with determination, "let me see that wound." Owen reluctantly removed his shirt, revealing a muscular torso marred by various scars, evidence of a hard life. The most recent injury was an angry red bullet wound on his left shoulder, partially bandaged with a now soiled strip of cloth. Penelope gasped softly. "This needs to be cleaned properly. Do you have any whiskey?" Owen raised an eyebrow but reached into his saddlebag and produced a flask. "For medicinal purposes only, of course," he said with a hint of a smile. "Of course," Penelope agreed, accepting the flask. She carefully removed the makeshift bandage and examined the wound. The bullet went clean through, which is fortunate, but it's showing signs of infection. With gentle hands, she cleaned the area with water first, then used some of the whiskey to disinfect it. Owen hissed through his teeth but remained still, watching her work with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "You've done this before," he observed. "My father was a doctor," she explained, tearing a strip from her petticoat to create a fresh bandage. "I assisted him often. And where is your father now?" Penelope's hands stilled momentarily. "He passed away last year." "I'm sorry to hear that," Owen said, and he sounded sincere. "And the baby's father?" Penelope's expression hardened. "Not in the picture." Owen didn't press further. He knew what it was like to have parts of your past you'd rather not discuss. "Well, you've done a fine job, thank you." As Penelope finished bandaging his shoulder, the storm outside intensified. Rain lashed against the small window, and thunder shook the very foundations of the old church. "Looks like we're all stuck here together for the night," Owen remarked, pulling his shirt back on. "I'll let you get some rest. There's some jerky and hardtack in my bag if you're hungry." Penelope was indeed hungry. She couldn't remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal, but she was also exhausted. "Thank you, Mr. Finley, for everything." Owen nodded and turned to leave, but Penelope's voice stopped him at the door. "Mr. Finley, who shot you?" He glanced back at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Someone who didn't much care for my company. Get some sleep, Miss Garner. Morning will be here before you know it." With that cryptic response, he left, closing the door softly behind him. Penelope sank onto the edge of the cot beside Kyle, her mind racing with questions. Who was this mysterious cowboy who had given them shelter? Was he running from the law, or was he the law itself? And more importantly, could she trust him with her life and that of her child? As exhaustion overcame her, Penelope decided those were questions for tomorrow. Tonight they were safe from the storm and the men pursuing them, and that was enough. Morning arrived with a gentle golden light filtering through the small window of the pastor's study. Penelope awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. Then the events of the previous night came rushing back to her, and she quickly checked on Kyle, who was still sleeping peacefully beside her. The smell of coffee drifted through the air, making her stomach growl with hunger. She straightened her rumpled dress as best she could and finger-combed her tangled hair before picking up Kyle and venturing out to the main church. Owen Finley was sitting in one of the front pews, a small fire burning in a metal bucket at his feet. A pot of coffee balanced precariously on a grate over the flames. He looked up as she approached, his expression guarded. "Morning," he said, pouring a cup of coffee and offering it to her. "Hope I didn't wake you?" "No, not at all." Penelope accepted the cup gratefully, cradling it in one hand while holding Kyle with the other. "Thank you." Owen nodded toward the baby. "He slept through the night?" "Surprisingly, yes. The poor thing was exhausted from our journey." Owen studied her for a moment, his blue eyes intense. "Where are you headed, if you don't mind my asking?" Penelope hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "West," she finally said. "As far as I can go, running from something. Isn't everyone in these parts?" she countered. A ghost of a smile touched Owen's lips. "Fair enough." He handed her a piece of jerky and some hardtack. "It's not much of a breakfast, but it'll keep you going." As they ate in companionable silence, Penelope took the opportunity to study Owen more closely in the daylight. He was older than she had initially thought, perhaps in his early 30s, with weathered features that spoke of a life spent outdoors. His dark hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples, and a scar ran along his jawline. Despite his rough appearance, there was something in his eyes that suggested a deeper complexity, a hint of kindness beneath the hardened exterior. "How's your shoulder?" she asked, breaking the silence. Owen rolled it experimentally. "Better, thanks to your doctoring. You have a gentle touch." Penelope felt a blush creep into her cheeks at the compliment. "The infection should improve if you keep it clean. I can change the bandage before we leave." Owen raised an eyebrow. "I meant before Kyle and I leave," Penelope clarified quickly. "I don't want to impose on your hospitality any longer than necessary." Owen glanced out the church window at the muddy road beyond. "The storm's passed, but that road will be near impassable for a day or two. Where were you planning to go?" Penelope bit her lip. "I haven't quite figured that out yet. Is there a town nearby?" "Redemption's about 5 miles west," Owen replied. "Small place, but they've got a general store and a decent boarding house. Problem is, folks notice strangers in a town that size, and that's something you'd prefer to avoid." Penelope guessed. Owen's expression turned wary again. "Let's just say I've got reasons to keep a low profile for a while, same as you, I suspect." Kyle chose that moment to wake fully, letting out a hungry cry. Penelope rocked him gently, reaching for her bag to retrieve the last bottle of milk. "He's going to need proper food soon," she murmured, more to herself than to Owen. Owen watched her feed the baby, a strange expression crossing his face. "There's a widow who lives on the outskirts of town, Martha Holloway. She lost her husband last winter but kept their small farm going. She's got a milk cow and might be willing to help." "You know her well?" Penelope asked. "She patched me up once when I was in a tight spot," Owen replied. "Good woman doesn't ask too many questions." Penelope considered this information. "Would it be safe for us to go there?" "Safer than the road to nowhere," Owen pointed out. "I can take you there once the mud dries up a bit." "Why would you help us?" Penelope asked, suddenly suspicious. In her experience, men rarely offered assistance without expecting something in return. Owen's gaze met her steadily. "Because someone once helped me when I needed it most, and I never got the chance to repay that debt." There was a sincerity in his voice that Penelope couldn't dismiss. Still, caution had become her constant companion over the past few months. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Finley, but I shouldn't involve anyone else in my troubles." "Whatever you're running from, Miss Garner, it'll catch up faster if you're trying to survive alone with a baby," Owen said bluntly. "These parts aren't kind to solitary women." Penelope knew he was right, but pride and fear warred within her. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses reached them. Owen was on his feet in an instant, his hand going to his holster. "Get back to the room," he instructed, his voice low and urgent. "Stay quiet." Penelope didn't hesitate, gathering Kyle and hurrying back to the small study. She closed the door behind her, heart pounding as she strained to hear what was happening in the main church. Through the thin walls, she could make out the creak of the church door opening and multiple boots stepping onto the wooden floor. "Well, well," a deep voice drawled. "If it isn't Owen Finley, the man who shot my brother." "Your brother drew first, Davis," Owen's voice replied, steady and controlled. "You know that as well as I do. Doesn't much matter now, does it? He's 6 feet under and you're about to join him." Penelope clutched Kyle tighter, her mind racing. Owen was clearly in danger, and it was only a matter of time before these men searched the church and found her and Kyle. She looked around desperately for something, anything that might help. Her gaze fell on a loose floorboard in the corner. Setting Kyle down carefully on the cot, she pried it up to reveal a small space beneath, perhaps where the pastor had once hidden church valuables. It wasn't large, but it might be enough to conceal Kyle if necessary. Back in the main church, Owen was buying time. 3 against 1, Davis. "I thought you had more honor than that." "Honor," Davis laughed. "That's rich coming from you. Word is you've been riding with the Stillwater gang these past months. Didn't think you'd sink that low." "Don't believe everything you hear," Owen replied. "I've never ridden with Stillwater." "Then why are you hiding out in an abandoned church with a bullet in your shoulder?" "Word is the Stillwater gang robbed the bank in Cheyenne last week, got away with $5,000. One of them took a bullet in the process." "Wasn't me," Owen insisted. "I got this from a bounty hunter who didn't bother to check if I was actually the man on his wanted poster." Penelope listened to this exchange with growing alarm. Was Owen Finley a bank robber? Had she and Kyle taken shelter with a dangerous criminal? The sound of a scuffle reached her ears, followed by a gunshot that made her jump. Kyle, startled by the noise, began to cry. Penelope quickly picked him up, trying desperately to quiet him, but it was too late. The damage was done. "What was that?" Davis's voice demanded. "Search the place." Penelope heard footsteps approaching the study door. With no time to hide Kyle in the floor space, she pressed herself against the wall beside the door, holding her breath as the handle turned. The door swung open, and a burly man with a scraggly beard stepped into the room, his gun drawn. His eyes widened when he saw Penelope and the baby. "Well, what have we here?" he said with a cruel smile. "Finley's got himself a woman and a brat." Before Penelope could react, the man grabbed her arm and dragged her out into the main church, Kyle wailing in her grasp. Owen was on his knees, blood trickling from a cut above his eye, his gun on the floor several feet away. 2 other men stood over him, their weapons trained on his head. "Look what I found, Davis," the bearded man announced, shoving Penelope forward. The man, called Davis, tall and lean with cold eyes, looked Penelope up and down with interest. "Who might you be, pretty lady?" Penelope lifted her chin defiantly. "Just a traveler seeking shelter from the storm. I don't know this man." Davis glanced at Owen. "That true, Finley?" "You just being a good Samaritan? Leave her out of this," Owen growled. "She's got nothing to do with our business," Davis laughed. "Well now, that's where you're wrong. See, she's just become my insurance that you'll tell me where the money is." Penelope's heart sank as she realized the danger they were in. These men believed Owen had been part of a bank robbery and had hidden the money. Whether it was true or not didn't matter, they were willing to hurt her and Kyle to get what they wanted. "There is no money," Owen insisted. "I wasn't part of the Stillwater gang's robbery. Check my saddlebags if you don't believe me." "Oh, we will," Davis assured him. "But first, you're going to tell me everything you know about Stillwater's operation, where they're holed up, where they stash the cash, all of it." "I don't know anything," Owen repeated, his eyes flicking to Penelope and Kyle with concern. Davis sighed dramatically and nodded to the bearded man, who grabbed Penelope's arm again, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "Maybe you need some motivation," Davis suggested. "Harley here has a particular way with women that tends to loosen men's tongues." Owen's expression darkened. Touch her, and it'll be the last thing you ever do. The threat hung in the air, and for a moment no one moved. Then, with surprising speed for an injured man, Owen lunged for his discarded gun. The third man, who had remained silent until now, reacted quickly, bringing the butt of his pistol down on Owen's head. Owen crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Penelope cried out involuntarily, struggling against Harley's grip. "Tie him up," Davis ordered. "We'll take them both back to camp. Finley can watch while we persuade his woman to tell us what she knows." "I don't know anything," Penelope protested, fear making her voice shake. "Please, my baby has nothing to do with this." Davis approached her, tilting her chin up with the barrel of his gun. "We'll see about that, won't we? A night with Harley tends to make most women very talkative." Bile rose in Penelope's throat at the implication. Kyle continued to cry, his little face red with distress. The man called Harley reached for the baby with his free hand, but Penelope twisted away. "Don't touch him," she snarled, a mother's fierce protectiveness overriding her fear. Something flickered in Davis's eyes, surprise, perhaps, at her sudden show of spirit. "The baby stays with you for now," he decided, "but keep him quiet or I might change my mind." As the men busied themselves binding Owen's unconscious form, Penelope tried to soothe Kyle, her mind frantically searching for a way out of this nightmare. She had escaped one dangerous situation only to find herself in another, and this time she had inadvertently dragged someone else into her troubles. Owen groaned as he regained consciousness, his eyes focusing slowly on Penelope and Kyle across the campfire. They had been brought to a small clearing in the woods about an hour's ride from the church. His hands were tied behind his back, and his ankles were bound as well. Penelope sat with Kyle in her arms, her face pale but determined in the flickering firelight. Davis and his men had set up camp efficiently, suggesting they were accustomed to life on the trail. They had taken turns watching their prisoners while the others ate a simple meal of beans and bacon. Now, as night fell, Davis approached Owen with a canteen of water. "Ready to talk yet, Finley?" he asked, holding the water just out of reach. Owen glared up at him. "I've told you everything I know, which is nothing. I'm not part of Stillwater's gang." "Then why were you hiding out in that church?" Davis pressed. "And don't give me that bounty hunter story again." Owen sighed, his eyes flicking briefly to Penelope. "I was running from the law, but not for the bank job. I killed a man in self-defense up in Montana territory. His brother's a judge there put a price on my head even though it was a fair fight." Davis considered this, then nodded to one of his men. "Check his saddlebags again, see if there's anything to back up his story." While they were distracted, Owen caught Penelope's eye and mouthed something she couldn't quite make out. She frowned, trying to understand. He repeated the gesture, and this time she realized he was indicating something behind her with a subtle tilt of his head. Carefully, trying not to draw attention, Penelope glanced over her shoulder. At first, she saw nothing but darkness beyond the circle of firelight. Then a shadow moved and she caught a glimpse of a figure crouching in the underbrush. Hope surged within her. Someone was out there, perhaps help had arrived, but who? And how had they found them? Her questions were answered a moment later when a shot rang out, sending Davis's hat flying from his head. The men scrambled for cover as more shots followed, precise and controlled, keeping them pinned down but not hitting anyone. "Ambush," Harley shouted, returning fire blindly into the darkness. Owen rolled away from the campfire, working his bound hands beneath him and over his feet so that his arms were now in front of him. He crawled toward Penelope, who had curled protectively around Kyle. "Stay down," he instructed, positioning himself between her and the gunfire. "Who is it?" She whispered. "Friends," Owen replied simply. "When I give the word, run toward the big oak tree to the east. Someone will be waiting for you there." Penelope nodded, clutching Kyle tighter. The baby, exhausted from the day's events, had remarkably slept through the initial gunfire but was now beginning to stir. The shooting continued for several more minutes, a strategic pattern that seemed designed to create confusion rather than casualties. Finally, one of Davis's men cried out, "I'm hit," And another shouted, "There's too many of them." "Fall back," Davis ordered. "To the horses." As Davis and his remaining men retreated, Owen nudged Penelope. "Now, go." Penelope didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the oak tree Owen had indicated, her heart pounding in her ears. Behind her, she heard Owen struggling to his feet, hampered by his bound ankles. A figure materialized from the shadows beneath the oak, a woman with a rifle. "This way," she said urgently, guiding Penelope deeper into the woods. They ran for several minutes, the sounds of gunfire growing fainter behind them. Finally, they reached a small clearing where 3 horses waited. The woman helped Penelope mount one while still holding Kyle, then turned back toward the camp. "Wait here," she instructed. "I need to help Owen." "Who are you?" Penelope asked, but the woman had already disappeared into the darkness. Minutes passed like hours as Penelope waited anxiously, rocking Kyle and whispering soothing words to keep him calm. Finally, she heard approaching footsteps and tensed, ready to flee if necessary. But it was Owen who emerged from the trees, supported by the mysterious woman. His bonds had been cut, but he was limping badly and fresh blood stained his shirt. "You're hurt again," Penelope observed with concern. "Just reopened the old wound," Owen replied, grimacing as the woman helped him onto one of the remaining horses. "Nothing that won't heal." The woman mounted the 3rd horse with fluid grace. "We need to move quickly, they'll regroup soon enough." As they rode through the moonlit forest, Penelope studied their rescuer. She was perhaps in her 40s, with streaks of gray in her dark hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of her life outdoors. She handled her horse with the confidence of an experienced rider, leading them along what appeared to be a game trail. "Are you Martha Holloway?" Penelope guessed, remembering the widow Owen had mentioned earlier. The woman glanced back with surprise. "Yes, how did you know?" "Owen mentioned you might be willing to help us," Penelope explained, "though I didn't expect it to be quite like this." Martha's lips curved in a slight smile. "Owen and I go back a ways. When I saw those men taking you from the church, I knew trouble was brewing." "How did you know we were at the church?" Penelope asked. "I was bringing supplies to check on it. I look after the place since the pastor died last year," Martha explained. "Saw the horses outside and recognized Davis's roan. That man's been causing trouble in these parts for years." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the soft thud of hooves on the forest floor and Kyle's occasional whimpers. Penelope had 1,000 questions, but sensed that now was not the time for conversation. After about an hour of riding, they emerged from the woods onto a small homestead. A modest cabin stood in a clearing with a barn and corral nearby. A cow mooed softly in greeting as they approached. "It's not much," Martha said as they dismounted, "but it's home and it's safe. Davis and his kind know better than to come here." "Why is that?" Penelope asked, curious. Martha's expression hardened. "Let's just say the last man who tried didn't live to tell about it." Owen chuckled weakly. Martha's reputation as a crack shot is well earned. She was showing off those skills tonight. Inside the cabin, Martha quickly set about tending to Owen's reopened wound while Penelope settled Kyle in a makeshift bed crafted from a drawer lined with soft blankets. The baby, exhausted from the day's excitement, fell asleep almost immediately. "You have a beautiful son," Martha remarked as she finished bandaging Owen's shoulder. Penelope hesitated, then decided truth was the simplest option. "He's not mine, not by birth. His mother was my friend. She died in childbirth and his father." She trailed off, the memories still too painful. "The child needs a mother and you clearly love him," Martha said simply. "That makes him yours in all the ways that matter." Penelope smiled gratefully, touched by the woman's understanding. "Thank you." Owen watched this exchange with interest. "Is that why you're running? Because of the baby?" Penelope's smile faded. "Partly. Kyle's father is a powerful man in Denver Harrison Blackwood." Owen's eyebrows shot up in recognition. "The railroad tycoon." "The same," Penelope confirmed. "My friend Lillian was a housemaid in his home. When she told him she was expecting his child, he fired her to avoid the scandal. I took her in, but the birth was difficult and she didn't survive." "And Blackwood wants the child now," Martha guessed. Penelope nodded. He showed up at my door a month after Kyle was born, claiming he'd had a change of heart. But I'd heard him tell Lillian that no child of his would be raised by a servant. He only wants Kyle because his wife can't have children and he needs an heir for his fortune. So you took the baby and ran, Owen concluded. I promised Lillian I would protect her son, Penelope said firmly. Blackwood would raise him to be as cold and calculating as he is. I couldn't let that happen. Martha nodded approvingly. You did right by your friend. Blackwood has men searching for us, Penelope continued. That's why we can't stay in one place too long. He's offering a substantial reward for our return. Owen and Martha exchanged a look that Penelope couldn't quite interpret. Well, you're safe here for now, Martha assured her. Get some rest. We can talk more in the morning. As Martha showed Penelope to a small bedroom at the back of the cabin, Owen remained by the fire, deep in thought. The situation was more complicated than he had initially assumed. Harrison Blackwood was not a man to be trifled with. His influence extended far beyond Denver, and he had the resources to hunt down anyone who crossed him. Yet as Owen recalled the determination in Penelope's eyes when she spoke of protecting Kyle, he felt a grudging admiration for her courage. She had risked everything for a child who wasn't even hers by blood, driven by a promise to a friend and a sense of what was right. It was a feeling Owen understood all too well, the need to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, regardless of the personal cost. It was what had led him to this point in his life, always on the run, never able to settle in one place for long. Perhaps, he thought, as sleep finally claimed him, he and Penelope Garner weren't so different after all. Morning at Martha Holloway's homestead brought with it a sense of temporary peace. Penelope awoke to the unfamiliar sound of a rooster crowing and the smell of coffee brewing. For a moment she lay still, savoring the simple luxury of a real bed after days of rough travel. Kyle stirred in his makeshift crib, making the soft cooing sounds that signaled he was awake but not yet hungry. Penelope lifted him gently, marveling at how he seemed to grow heavier each day despite their difficult circumstances. "Good morning, little one," she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "Did you sleep well?" Kyle responded with a gummy smile that melted Penelope's heart. These quiet moments with him were what kept her going, what made all the hardship worthwhile. After changing Kyle's diaper with one of the clean cloths Martha had provided, Penelope made her way to the main room of the cabin. Owen sat at the table, sipping coffee while Martha bustled about the kitchen, preparing what appeared to be a substantial breakfast. "There she is," Martha said with a warm smile. "I was beginning to think you might sleep the day away. Can't blame you, though you've had quite an ordeal." "I haven't slept that well in weeks," Penelope admitted, settling into a chair with Kyle on her lap. "Thank you for your hospitality." "Nonsense," Martha waved away her thanks. "Any friend of Owen's is welcome here." Owen glanced up from his coffee, his expression unreadable. "Martha and I were just discussing your situation. We think it's best if you stay here for a few days, at least until we're sure Davis and his men have moved on." Penelope hesitated. "I don't want to put either of you in danger." "If Blackwood's men track us here, let me worry about that," Martha interrupted, placing a plate of eggs and bacon in front of Penelope. "This place is well hidden, and I've got friends in town who keep me informed of strangers passing through. Besides, that little one needs a stable place for more than just a night." As if to emphasize Martha's point, Kyle began to fuss, his hunger making itself known. Martha immediately moved to a cupboard and retrieved a small glass bottle filled with milk. "Fresh this morning," she explained, handing it to Penelope. "Warm it by the fire for a bit first." While Penelope fed Kyle, Owen and Martha continued their discussion in low voices. Penelope caught fragments mentions of supplies and safe passage and something about the northern route. They were clearly planning something, and she wasn't sure whether to be grateful or concerned. After breakfast, Martha announced she needed to tend to her animals and departed for the barn, leaving Owen and Penelope alone with Kyle. "Your shoulder looks better," Penelope observed, breaking the somewhat awkward silence. Owen rolled it experimentally. "Martha has a way with herbal remedies. She learned from a Cheyenne healer years ago. She seems like a remarkable woman. She is, Owen agreed. Lost her husband and son in a raid 10 years back. Instead of becoming bitter, she built this place up on her own and has been helping folks in need ever since. People like you? Penelope asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Owen's expression closed off slightly. I've had my share of trouble, yes. Those men yesterday, they seem to think you were part of a gang that robbed a bank. Davis has been after me for years, Owen explained, his voice carefully neutral. His brother drew on me in a saloon in Helena. I was faster. Davis never accepted that it was a fair fight and he'll use any excuse to come after me. But were you involved in the robbery? Penelope pressed. Owen met her gaze directly. No, I've done things I'm not proud of, Miss Garner, but I've never robbed a bank or taken an innocent life. Something in his steady gaze convinced Penelope he was telling the truth. I believe you, she said simply. Surprise flickered across Owen's face, followed by something that might have been gratitude. That's more than most would offer. Well, you did save our lives, Penelope pointed out. Twice now. And you treated my wound when you could have just taken shelter and kept your distance, Owen countered. Seems we're even. A comfortable silence fell between them as Penelope finished feeding Kyle and settled him against her shoulder to burp him. Owen watched the domestic scene with an expression Penelope couldn't quite interpret, somewhere between wistfulness and fascination. You're good with him, Owen observed softly. Penelope smiled down at Kyle. He makes it easy. He's such a good baby, considering everything he's been through. Children are resilient, Owen said, a distant look entering his eyes. More than we give them credit for. You have children, Mr. Finley? Penelope asked, realizing she knew very little about the man who had risked his life for them. A shadow crossed Owen's face. No, he said simply, and something in his tone told Penelope not to pursue that line of questioning further. Instead, she changed the subject. What were you and Martha discussing earlier? I heard something about a northern route. Owen hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Martha knows someone who runs a trading post near the Canadian border. If you could make it there, you'd be beyond Blackwood's reach. The Mounties don't generally honor American warrants unless it's for a serious crime, and taking your friend's orphan child hardly qualifies. Hope flickered in Penelope's chest. Canada, I hadn't considered going that far. It would be a fresh start, Owen pointed out, a place where Blackwood's influence doesn't extend. How would we get there? It must be hundreds of miles. Nearly 1,000 from here, Owen confirmed. But Martha has connections with freight wagon drivers who make regular runs north. It would take time, but it could be done safely, with you and Kyle traveling as part of various legitimate shipments. Penelope considered this possibility. A new country, a new beginning for her, and Kyle somewhere Harrison Blackwood couldn't reach them. It was an enticing prospect. What about you? She asked, the question slipping out before she could consider its implications. Owen looked startled. Me, will you go back to? Whatever you were doing before, Penelope clarified, feeling a strange reluctance at the thought. Owen studied her for a long moment. I haven't decided yet. I've been thinking it might be time for a change myself. Before Penelope could respond, Martha returned from the barn, bringing with her the fresh scent of hay and the outdoors. Well, the animals are fed and happy, she announced. Now, who's up for learning how to make proper sourdough bread? Something tells me our Miss Garner here hasn't had much practice with frontier cooking. Penelope laughed, grateful for the interruption. You found me out. I'm afraid my culinary skills are rather limited. Well, we can't have that, Martha declared. If you're going to make a new life up north, you'll need to know how to feed yourself and that little one properly. And so the day passed in domestic activities, Martha teaching Penelope the basics of cooking over a wood stove, Owen repairing a loose board on the porch, Kyle napping peacefully in a sunbeam. It was a glimpse of normal life, something Penelope had almost forgotten existed during her weeks on the run. As evening approached, Martha announced she needed to ride into town for supplies and information. I want to make sure those men have truly left the area, she explained, checking her rifle before strapping it to her saddle. I should be back by midnight. Lock the door behind me and don't open it for anyone but me. After Martha departed, a strange tension seemed to fill the cabin. Penelope busied herself with Kyle while Owen cleaned his revolver at the table, both of them aware of the other's presence in a way that hadn't been apparent when Martha was there as a buffer. "Tell me about your life before all this," Owen finally said, breaking the silence. "You said your father was a doctor," Penelope nodded, grateful for the conversation. "Yes, in St. Louis. After my mother died when I was 12, I started helping him with his practice. I learned a great deal about medicine that way." "Is that how you met your friend Kyle's mother, Lillian?" "No, we grew up together. Her family lived next door to ours. After my father died last year, I couldn't keep up the payments on our house. Lillian had already moved to Denver to work for the Blackwoods, and she helped me secure a position as a companion to Mrs. Blackwood." "So you worked in Blackwood's house too?" Owen asked, surprised. "For several months," Penelope confirmed. "That's how I know what kind of man he is. He treats his wife like a possession and his servants like they're invisible. When Lillian told me she was expecting his child, I resigned my position and used my savings to rent a small apartment where she could stay until the baby came." "That was brave," Owen remarked. "Many would have turned their back on a friend in such circumstances." Penelope shook her head. "It wasn't bravery, just decency. Lillian had no one else. And after she died, didn't you consider giving the baby to Blackwood?" "Never," Penelope said firmly. "You didn't see his face when Lillian told him about the baby." There was no love there, no concern for her or his child, just anger at the inconvenience she had caused him. "When he came to my door after her death, all he talked about was his legacy and his need for an heir. He never even asked the baby's name." Owen nodded slowly. "So you decided to run?" "I didn't see any other choice. Blackwood is a powerful man. If I had gone to the authorities, he would have used his influence to take Kyle anyway and probably had me arrested for some invented crime." "And now you're considering Canada," Owen mused. "It's a big decision." "Do you think it's the right one?" Penelope asked, suddenly valuing his opinion more than she would have expected. Owen was quiet for a moment, considering. "I think," he finally said, "that a child deserves to be raised by someone who loves them for who they are, not what they represent." "From what I've seen, that's you." Warmth spread through Penelope's chest at his words. "Thank you," she said softly. Their eyes met across the room, and something unspoken passed between them, a moment of connection that transcended their brief acquaintance. Owen opened his mouth as if to say something more, but a sudden knock at the door made them both freeze. "Martha wouldn't be back this soon," Penelope whispered, clutching Kyle closer. Owen motioned for her to stay back as he approached the door, gun drawn. "Who's there?" he called. "Deputy Marshal James Wilson," a voice replied. "I'm looking for Owen Finley." Owen's expression hardened. "What business does a marshal have with me?" "I have information about Davis and his men. Information you'll want to hear, Finley. I'm alone and unarmed." Owen hesitated, then nodded to Penelope. "Take Kyle to the back room and stay there until I call for you." Penelope complied, her heart racing as she retreated to the bedroom with Kyle. She left the door slightly ajar, however, unable to resist listening to the conversation. Owen opened the front door cautiously, his gun still at the ready. A tall man in a marshal's coat stood on the porch, hands raised to show he carried no weapon. "You can put that away," the marshal said, nodding at Owen's gun. "If I wanted to arrest you, I'd have brought a posse." "What do you want, Wilson?" Owen asked, not lowering his weapon. "May I come in?" "This isn't a conversation I want to have in the open." After a moment's consideration, Owen stepped aside to let the marshal enter. The man removed his hat, revealing a weather-beaten face and graying hair. He took in the cabin with a practiced eye before settling his gaze on Owen. "Davis and his men were found dead this morning," he said without preamble. "Shot execution style about 5 miles from here." Owen's surprise seemed genuine. "That wasn't my doing." "I know," Wilson replied. "It has all the hallmarks of the Stillwater gang. Apparently, Davis had been boasting in town about tracking down one of their members. I told him I wasn't part of Stillwater's outfit," Owen said. "He didn't believe me." "Well, Stillwater clearly wanted to make sure no one else got the same idea," Wilson commented. "But that's not why I'm here. I received a telegram from Denver today. There's a private detective asking questions about a woman traveling with an infant, offering a substantial reward for information. From her hiding place, Penelope stifled a gasp. Blackwood's men were closing in. "I don't know anything about that," Owen said carefully. Wilson gave him a skeptical look. "Martha Holloway was seen buying baby supplies in town this morning. She's never shown interest in such things before. And you've been spotted in her company. It doesn't take a genius to connect the dots, Finley." "What's your point, Marshal?" Owen asked, his voice hard. "My point is that I've known Martha for 10 years, and if she's helping someone, they must be worth helping. I've also known you long enough to know you're not the outlaw some make you out to be." Wilson leaned forward. "But this detective from Denver, he's dangerous. He's already bribed 2 of my deputies for information. And you're telling me this out of the goodness of your heart." Owen's skepticism was evident. Wilson smiled thinly. "Let's just say I have no love for men who use their wealth and power to manipulate the law. Besides, I owe Martha a favor from way back." He placed his hat back on his head. "There's a train leaving for Bismarck tomorrow at noon. The detective and his men will be occupied on the east side of town, investigating a false lead I provided." Understanding dawned on Owen's face. "I appreciate the information, Marshal." Wilson nodded and turned to leave, then paused at the door. "One more thing, Finley, that warrant from Montana. Judge Crawford died last month. His replacement reviewed your case and determined it was self-defense, as you claimed. The bounty's been withdrawn." With that surprising news, the marshal departed, leaving Owen standing in the middle of the room, processing this unexpected turn of events. Penelope emerged from the bedroom, Cal sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Did I hear correctly? The men who are after you, that matter's been resolved?" Owen nodded slowly. "It appears so. After 3 years on the run, I'm suddenly a free man." He looked almost disoriented by the concept. "And the other part about Blackwood's detective? We need to leave first thing in the morning," Owen said decisively. "The marshal's giving us a window of opportunity, but it won't last long." "Us?" Penelope questioned, her heart skipping at the implication. Owen met her gaze steadily. "If you'll have my company, I know the Northern Territories well. I could help you and Kyle reach the border safely." Penelope studied his face, searching for any sign of uncertainty. "Why would you do that? You're free now. You could go anywhere, start a new life." "Perhaps that's exactly what I'm proposing to do," Owen replied quietly. The weight of his words hung in the air between them. Before Penelope could respond, the sound of a horse approaching signaled Martha's return. The older woman bustled in, arms full of supplies, her expression grim. "We've got trouble," she announced, then stopped short at the tension in the room. "What happened? Did I miss something?" Owen quickly filled her in on the marshal's visit and the news about Blackwood's detective. Martha listened intently, nodding as if her own information confirmed what she was hearing. "Wilson's right," she said when Owen finished. "The detective's name is Pinkerton. He's got 3 men with him, all armed. They've been showing Kyle's description all over town." "How could they have tracked us here so quickly?" Penelope wondered aloud, dismayed. "Blackwood has money and connections," Martha said grimly. "And you've been traveling with a baby that's memorable to folks along the way." "The marshal said there's a train to Bismarck tomorrow," Owen reminded them. "If we can get on it." "Too risky," Martha interrupted. "They'll be watching the station, but I have another idea." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and spread it on the table. It was a roughly drawn map of the region. "There's a wagon train leaving for the Northern Territories day after tomorrow," she explained, pointing to a marked location. "Old friend of mine is the wagon master. They're taking settlers up to the Dakota Territory, near the Canadian border. If you can join them, you'd have safety in numbers, and it would be much harder for Blackwood's men to single you out." "A wagon train," Penelope repeated, considering the idea. "Wouldn't we need a wagon, supplies?" "I've got a small wagon you can use," Martha offered. "And I've already purchased supplies, said they were for my cousin coming to visit." Owen studied the map. "It's a good plan. The detective would be looking for a woman traveling alone with a baby, not a family joining a wagon train." "A family." Penelope echoed, suddenly understanding the implication. Martha looked between them with a practical expression. It would be the safest cover. A young couple with their baby would draw far less attention than a single woman with a child. The suggestion hung in the air, neither Owen nor Penelope immediately responding. The idea of posing as husband and wife was both practical and somehow unsettling, a pretense that felt strangely significant. It would only be for the journey, Owen finally said, his tone carefully neutral. Once you reach the border, you'd be free to continue on your own. Penelope nodded slowly, recognizing the logic of the plan despite the flutter of uncertainty it caused in her chest. If you think it's the best way to keep Kyle safe, then I agree. Good, Martha said briskly, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrent between them. We'll need to leave before dawn to reach the meeting point by nightfall tomorrow. I suggest you both get some rest while you can. As they prepared for bed that night, Penelope's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Tomorrow, she would begin a journey that would take her far from everything familiar, posing as the wife of a man she had known for mere days. It was madness by any rational standard. Yet as she watched Owen gently check on the sleeping Kyle before retiring to his makeshift bed by the fire, Penelope felt an unexpected certainty that she was making the right choice. There was something about Owen Finley, his quiet strength, his unfailing protectiveness, the hint of gentleness beneath his rough exterior that inspired a trust she had rarely felt before. Whatever tomorrow might bring, she was no longer facing it alone. The wagon train stretched across the Dakota plains like a great, lumbering creature, 24 wagons moving steadily northward under the vast blue sky. It had been 2 weeks since Penelope, Owen, and Kyle had joined the caravan of hopeful settlers, and already the rhythm of trail life had become familiar. The pre-dawn rising, the careful packing of their small wagon, the long days of travel punctuated by brief rests, and the nightly ritual of circling the wagons for protection. Their cover story had been accepted without question. To the other travelers, they were simply Owen and Penelope Finley, a young couple from Wyoming Territory seeking a fresh start in the north with their infant son. If anyone found it curious that they possessed few personal belongings or family keepsakes, no one mentioned it. Many on the wagon train were starting over themselves, fleeing poverty or painful pasts. The wagon master, Martha's friend Samuel Watts, was a grizzled veteran of the trails who asked few questions and valued competence above all else. He had stationed the Finley's wagon toward the middle of the train, where they would be most protected in case of trouble. Not that there had been much trouble so far. The journey had been remarkably peaceful, with only one brief encounter with a small band of Lakota hunters who had been more curious than hostile. Samuel had traded tobacco and coffee for fresh meat, and the natives had moved on, seemingly satisfied with the exchange. For Penelope, the greatest challenges had been the practical aspects of caring for Kyle while constantly on the move. Keeping him clean, fed, and comfortable in a jolting wagon was no small feat. But she had adapted quickly, learning to time his feedings with the caravan's rest stops and fashioning a small hammock inside the wagon where he could sleep relatively undisturbed by the motion. Owen had proven to be an unexpected source of support. Though initially awkward in his role as pretend husband and father, he had gradually settled into it with a natural ease that sometimes made Penelope forget it was all for show. He took his turn holding Kyle during rest stops, seemed genuinely delighted by the baby's increasing responsiveness, and had even mastered the art of changing diapers with minimal fuss. More surprising still was the easy companionship that had developed between them. During the long hours on the trail, they had shared stories of their lives, Owen speaking of his years working cattle drives in Texas, before a wrongful accusation had set him on the run, Penelope describing her childhood in St. Louis and her dreams of someday using her knowledge of medicine to help others. They had learned to move around each other in the confined space of the wagon with a comfortable familiarity, anticipating each other's needs and respecting each other's boundaries. At night, Owen always made his bed outside by the fire with the other men, never presuming upon their pretended marriage, a courtesy Penelope deeply appreciated. Now, as the afternoon sun beat down on the prairie, Penelope sat beside Owen on the wagon's seat, Kyle sleeping peacefully in a sling across her chest. The monotonous landscape stretched out before them, broken only by occasional outcroppings of rock or stands of cottonwood trees marking distant water sources. "Samuel says we should reach the Pembina River in about a week," Owen remarked, squinting against the sun. "From there, it's only a few days to the Canadian border." Penelope felt a mixture of relief and something like disappointment at this news. Relief because they were nearing the safety she had sought for Kyle, disappointment because it meant their time together was coming to an end. "What will you do then?" she asked, keeping her voice casual. When we reached the border, Owen was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins. "I haven't decided yet," he finally said. "With the Montana warrant cleared, I could head back south. There's a ranch in Colorado I worked at years ago. Owner always said there'd be a job for me if I wanted it." "That sounds like a good opportunity," Penelope said, ignoring the hollow feeling his words created. "It would be," Owen agreed, then added more softly, "but I've been thinking lately that maybe it's time to put down roots somewhere new. Start fresh." Before Penelope could respond to this intriguing statement, a rider approached from the front of the wagon train, Samuel's son Daniel, who served as scout and messenger. "Pa says we'll make camp early today," Daniel announced, bringing his horse alongside their wagon. "There's a creek up ahead with good water and plenty of grazing for the stock. Might be the last good water we see for a few days." "Sounds wise," Owen replied. "Any sign of trouble?" Daniel shook his head. "All quiet. Though Pa did mention seeing dust to the south earlier, could be another party heading this way, or maybe just a herd of buffalo. I'll be keeping an eye out." As Daniel rode on to inform the other wagons, Penelope felt a flicker of unease. "Do you think it could be Blackwood's men?" Owen considered this. "It's possible, but unlikely. We've been traveling for 2 weeks with no sign of pursuit, and even if they somehow tracked us to the wagon train, they'd have no way of knowing which wagon to look for." His reassurance was logical, but Penelope couldn't shake her sense of foreboding. She had learned to trust her instincts over the past months, and something about the mention of that distant dust cloud troubled her. By late afternoon, the wagon train had reached the creek Daniel had mentioned. It was a pleasant spot, with clear water flowing between grassy banks and a small stand of trees providing welcome shade. The wagons formed their customary circle, and soon the camp was bustling with activity, women preparing meals, men tending to livestock, children finally free to run and play after hours confined to the wagons. Penelope had just finished nursing Kyle when one of the other women, a friendly widow named Rebecca, approached their campfire. "I'm organizing a washing day," she announced cheerfully. "Several of us are going to take advantage of the good water to do laundry. Would you like to join us?" Penelope hesitated, glancing at Owen, who was helping to secure the horses for the night. "Go ahead," he encouraged, reading her concern. "Kyle and I will manage just fine for a few hours." Still uncertain, Penelope gathered the items that needed washing, mostly Kyle's soiled cloths and a few of their own garments. "Are you sure?" she asked Owen in a low voice. "I've never left him before." Owen took Kyle from her arms with surprising confidence. "We men need time to discuss important matters," he said with mock seriousness. "Like whether the Yankees or the Cubs will win the pennant this year." His attempt at humor worked. Penelope smiled despite herself. "He needs to be fed again in about 2 hours," she instructed. "And if he gets fussy, try walking him while patting his back gently." "I remember," Owen assured her. "Go enjoy some time with the other women. You've earned it." Joining the group of women at the creek, Penelope found herself welcomed into their easy camaraderie. As they worked, conversations flowed freely, talk of the homes they had left behind, hopes for what lay ahead, remedies for trail ailments, and the universal challenges of raising children in such difficult circumstances. "Your husband is so good with the baby," Rebecca commented as they spread wet garments on bushes to dry. "Not all men take to fatherhood so naturally." Penelope felt a blush creep into her cheeks at the word husband. "Yes, Owen has been a great help," she replied, keeping her response deliberately vague. "And handsome, too," added another woman with a knowing wink. "You're a fortunate woman, Penelope." "I am," Penelope agreed, surprised by how true the words felt despite the pretense of their relationship. Owen had indeed proven to be a blessing in her life, appearing just when she needed him most and standing by her with unwavering support ever since. The afternoon passed pleasantly, and by the time the women gathered their dried laundry and headed back to camp, Penelope felt refreshed in spirit as well as body. The simple pleasure of female companionship was something she had sorely missed during her months on the run. As she approached their wagon, however, she noticed immediately that something was wrong. Owen was nowhere to be seen, and Kyle's familiar cry reached her ears. Alarmed, she hurried forward, dropping the bundle of clean laundry on the wagon seat as she searched for them. She found them at the edge of camp, Owen pacing back and forth with a wailing Kyle in his arms, his expression a mixture of concern and frustration. "What happened?" Penelope asked, reaching for the baby. Relief flooded Owen's face as he handed Kyle over. "He started crying about an hour ago and hasn't stopped since. I tried everything you suggested, but nothing worked. I was about to come looking for you." Kyle quieted almost immediately in Penelope's arms, his cries subsiding to hiccuping sobs. She checked him quickly. His diaper was clean and he didn't seem feverish. "I think he was just missing you," Owen said, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry I couldn't comfort him." "It's not your fault," Penelope assured him, touched by his genuine distress. "Babies sometimes get like this, especially with changes in routine." Owen nodded, but she could tell he was disappointed in himself. "I thought I was getting better at this," he admitted. "You are," Penelope said firmly. "Kyle adores you. I've seen how he watches you, how he smiles when you talk to him. This was just a bad moment, that's all." The sincerity in her voice seemed to reassure him. As they walked back to their campsite together, Penelope was struck by how much Owen had come to care for Kyle in such a short time. It was more than just part of their cover story. He had developed a genuine attachment to the child. That evening, as the camp settled into its nighttime routine, Samuel called the men together for a meeting. Owen returned to their fire some time later, his expression troubled. "What is it?" Penelope asked, immediately alert to his concern. Owen sat beside her on the wagon tongue, keeping his voice low. "Samuel's scouts reported riders following our trail, 6 men well armed moving fast." Penelope's heart sank. "Blackwood's men, it seems likely," Owen agreed grimly. "They're still a day behind us, but at their pace they could catch up by tomorrow evening." "What are we going to do?" Penelope clutched Kyle closer, her old fear returning with full force. Owen placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Samuel has a plan. There's a fork in the trail ahead. The main wagon train will continue north as planned, but a smaller group, 4 wagons including ours, will break off and head northwest toward Fort Pembina. The split should happen before the riders catch up, and with luck they'll follow the main group. And if they don't?" Penelope asked, voicing the question they were both thinking. Owen's hand moved to the revolver at his hip, a gesture that had become familiar to Penelope. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens, but I promise you, Penelope, they won't take Kyle, not while I'm breathing." The fierce protectiveness in his voice stirred something deep within her. In that moment, Penelope realized that her feelings for Owen had grown far beyond gratitude or friendship. Somewhere along the trail, amidst the dust and hardship and pretense, she had fallen in love with him. The revelation should have frightened her. Love had never been part of her plan when she fled Denver with Kyle, but instead it filled her with a strange calm. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. "We should get some rest," Owen suggested, misinterpreting her silence for fear. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Penelope nodded, not trusting herself to speak. As she prepared for bed, securing Kyle in his makeshift cradle inside the wagon, she wondered if Owen felt anything similar for her. He had been unfailingly kind and protective, but he had also been careful to maintain certain boundaries between them, never presuming upon their pretended relationship. Perhaps, she thought as she drifted toward sleep, that was answer enough. Dawn broke clear and cool, with a hint of autumn in the air despite the August date. The camp stirred to life earlier than usual, an undercurrent of tension evident in the hushed voices and hurried preparations. Word of the pursuing riders had spread, and though Samuel had assured everyone that there was no cause for alarm, the possibility of danger had everyone on edge. The plan was set in motion as soon as breakfast was concluded. The 4 wagons designated for the northwestern route, including the Finleys, were positioned at the rear of the train. When they reached the fork in the trail, they would quietly drop back and take the less traveled path while the main group continued north. Owen was unusually quiet as they broke camp, his attention divided between their preparations and the southern horizon. Penelope knew he was watching for any sign of dust that might indicate the riders were closer than expected. "Everything's ready," she told him, Kyle secured in his sling across her chest. "We can leave whenever Samuel gives the word." Owen nodded, his hand briefly touching the small of her back, a gesture of reassurance that had become habitual between them. "Stay close to me today," he said. "No matter what happens." The wagon train set out as the sun cleared the eastern horizon, moving at a slightly faster pace than usual. By mid-morning, they had reached the fork in the trail. Samuel signaled the main group to continue straight ahead while he dropped back to lead the smaller contingent on the northwestern route. The separation was accomplished smoothly, with no dramatic farewells or obvious changes in formation that might be visible from a distance. One by one, the 4 wagons simply fell back and then turned onto the less defined trail leading toward Fort Pembina. "Do you think it worked?" Penelope asked as they left the main trail behind, the dust of the larger wagon train still visible in the distance. "We'll know soon enough," Owen replied, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "If those riders are indeed looking for us, they'll have to choose which group to follow when they reach the fork." Their smaller party traveled in tense silence for several hours, each person aware of the potential danger behind them. Besides Samuel and the Finleys, the group consisted of a young couple named Thomas and Mary Baker and their 2 small children, an elderly brother and sister, Jacob and Ruth Stern, and a middle-aged doctor, Edmund Pearson, traveling alone to establish a practice in the Northern Territories. Around noon, Samuel called a brief halt to rest the animals and allow everyone a quick meal. As the others gathered by Dr. Pearson's wagon, which was leading their small procession, Owen took the opportunity to ride back along their trail to check for signs of pursuit. Penelope watched him go with a knot of anxiety in her stomach, busying herself with caring for Kyle to keep her mind occupied. The baby seemed to sense the tension in the air and was unusually fussy, refusing to settle for his usual midday nap. "First child is always the most challenging," Mary Baker commented, bouncing her own toddler on her knee, "but it gets easier with experience." Penelope smiled weakly, once again uncomfortable with the deception their cover story required. "Kyle has been a blessing," she said truthfully. "Even with the difficulties. And your husband is clearly devoted to you both," Mary added with a knowing smile. "The way he looks at you when you're not watching well, it's enough to make a romantic like me quite envious." Before Penelope could respond to this surprising observation, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, Owen returning at a gallop. Everyone fell silent as he rode into their small camp, his expression grim. "They've followed our trail," he announced without preamble. "6 riders, heavily armed, moving fast. They'll be on us within the hour." Samuel's weathered face showed no surprise, only resigned determination. "Then we make our stand here," he decided. "The ground's in our favor. That ridge to the north will give us some cover, and we can position the wagons to create a defensive perimeter." As the men quickly began moving the wagons into a semicircle against the ridge, Penelope pulled Owen aside. "Are you certain they're Blackwood's men?" she asked in a low voice. "I recognized one of them," Owen confirmed. "A hired gun named Fletcher who used to work in Denver. He's the type who sells his services to the highest bidder, exactly the sort Blackwood would employ." Penelope's heart sank. "This is my fault," she whispered. "I've put everyone in danger." Owen gripped her shoulders gently. "Listen to me, Penelope. You did what any decent person would do, protected a child who needed you. Whatever happens next, remember that." His faith in her brought tears to her eyes. "What are we going to do?" "Samuel and I have a plan," Owen replied. "The others will hold position here with the wagons. You, Kyle, and I will take one of the horses and make for that line of trees to the northwest. There's a river beyond that should lead us to Fort Pembina. If we can reach the fort, we'll be under military protection. But what about the others? We can't just leave them to face those men." "They won't have to fight," Owen assured her. "Once the riders see we're gone, they'll come after us and leave the wagons alone." Samuel understands the situation. He was the one who suggested it. Penelope glanced at the wagon master, who was calmly issuing instructions to the others, his rifle cradled in his arm. His willingness to risk himself and his people for them virtual strangers humbled her. "We need to move quickly," Owen urged. "Gather only what you and Kyle absolutely need. We'll travel light and fast." As Penelope hastily packed a small bundled diapers for Kyle, a change of clothes, what little food they could carry, she was acutely aware that this might be their final chance to escape Blackwood's reach. If they were caught now, so close to the border, she might never see freedom again, and Kyle would be raised by a man who saw him only as a means to secure his legacy. The thought steeled her resolve. She would not let that happen, not after coming so far. Owen appeared at the wagon with a saddled horse, a sturdy bay gelding that had been pulling Dr. Pearson's wagon. "The doctor insisted we take him," Owen explained as he helped Penelope secure their meager belongings. "Said he was the strongest mount in the group." Penelope looked around at the small band of travelers who had become, however briefly, their companions and protectors. They were preparing for a confrontation that was not their fight, yet none complained or hesitated. It was a stark reminder of the fundamental decency that existed even in this harsh frontier. "Thank you," she said simply, meeting each person's gaze in turn. "We won't forget this." Samuel approached, handing Owen a small but heavy pouch. "Ammunition," he explained, "and some jerky. The fort's about 20 miles northwest. If you ride hard, you can make it by nightfall." Owen clasped the older man's hand firmly. "I owe you a debt I can't repay," Samuel shook his head. "Just get that woman and child to safety. That'll be payment enough." A shout from Thomas Baker, who had been watching the southern approach, ended their conversation. "Riders coming, less than 2 miles out. Go now," Samuel urged, helping Owen lift Penelope and Kyle onto the horse. "We'll hold them here as long as we can." Owen swung up behind Penelope, his arms encircling her and Kyle as he took the reins. "Stay low and hold on tight," he instructed. With a final nod to Samuel, Owen guided the horse away from the wagons, heading northwest at a steady gallop toward the distant line of trees. Penelope clutched Kyle to her chest with one hand and gripped the saddle horn with the other, trying to move in rhythm with the horse to make their burden easier. Behind them, she heard shouts as the riders discovered the wagons, then more urgent cries as their escape was noticed. A shot rang out, then another, but they were already too far away for accurate fire. "They've seen us," Owen said grimly, urging the horse to greater speed. "Hold on." The race across the open prairie was a blur of motion and fear. The horse, sensing the urgency, gave everything it had, its powerful strides eating up the distance to the tree line. Kyle, remarkably, remained quiet, perhaps lulled by the steady motion or simply exhausted from his earlier fussing. Penelope risked a glance back and saw 3 riders breaking away from the wagons, turning their mounts to pursue them. "They're coming after us," she called to Owen. "Just as we planned," he replied, though she could hear the tension in his voice. "But we've got a good head start, and their horses are already tired from a hard ride." They reached the trees, a narrow belt of cottonwoods and willows marking the course of a stream, and Owen guided their mount into the denser cover, slowing only enough to navigate safely through the undergrowth. The sound of water grew louder, and soon they emerged onto the bank of a small river flowing northwest. "We'll follow this to the fort," Owen said, allowing the horse a moment to drink. "The water will hide our tracks if we cross to the far bank." But before they could urge the horse into the stream, a shot cracked through the air, splintering bark from a tree just above their heads. Owen immediately spurred the horse forward into the water, using the animal's body to shield Penelope and Kyle as best he could. "Keep your head down," he ordered as more shots followed them across the river. Their pursuers had reached the tree line more quickly than expected. As they struggled up the far bank, Penelope heard the splash of horses entering the water behind them. The chase was far from over. The terrain beyond the river was rougher, rolling hills dotted with stands of pine and rocky outcroppings. Owen used this to their advantage, weaving a path that kept them out of clear shooting range while still moving generally northwest toward the fort. But their horse was tiring, its sides heaving with exertion. Owen could feel the animal's strength waning beneath them. "We need to find a place to make a stand," he told Penelope. "The horse can't outrun them much longer." Ahead, a rocky ridge rose from the prairie, offering potential shelter. Owen guided their mount toward it, scanning for a defensible position. Near the base of the ridge, he spotted what he was looking for: a small depression surrounded by large boulders that could provide cover from multiple directions. "There," he said, pointing. "We'll stop there." As they reached the spot, Owen helped Penelope and Kyle dismount, then quickly unpacked their supplies and the ammunition Samuel had provided. The horse, freed of their weight, wandered a short distance away to graze, too exhausted to go far. "Get behind that largest boulder," Owen instructed, checking his revolver. "Keep Kyle quiet if you can." Penelope obeyed, her heart pounding as she settled into the small space between two massive rocks, cradling Kyle against her chest. The baby was awake but calm, his eyes wide as if sensing the gravity of their situation. Owen positioned himself where he could watch the approach while remaining mostly protected. They didn't have long to wait. Within minutes, 3 riders appeared in the distance, following their trail through the grass. "Only 3, Penelope whispered, hopeful. "Where are the others?" "Probably still at the wagons," Owen replied, his voice grim, "or circling around to cut us off." As the riders drew closer, Owen raised his rifle, taking careful aim. "I don't want to kill them if I can avoid it," he told Penelope, "but I will if they leave me no choice." The first shot was a warning, deliberately high and wide. The riders immediately scattered, seeking cover behind whatever the landscape offered. For several tense minutes, nothing happened. Then a voice called out from behind a distant clump of rocks. "We know you're there, Finley. There's no way out." Owen remained silent, watching their positions with the patience of a hunter. "All we want is the woman and the baby," the voice continued. "Hand them over and you can ride away free and clear." "Not going to happen," Owen shouted back. A shot answered him, chipping stone from the boulder near his head. Owen ducked, then returned fire, his bullet striking close enough to send one of the men scrambling for better cover. "That baby belongs to Harrison Blackwood," the voice called again. "He's offering $5,000 for their return. We can split it half for you, half for us." Penelope felt physically ill at the thought of Kyle being treated as a commodity to be bought and sold. But even worse was the seed of doubt the offer planted. Would Owen be tempted by such a sum? $5,000 was more money than most people saw in a lifetime. It could buy a ranch, security, a fresh start. She looked at Owen's face and immediately chastised herself for the doubt. His expression showed nothing but disgust and determination. "I don't make deals with men who hunt women and children," he shouted back. The standoff continued, with occasional exchanges of gunfire that seemed designed more to keep them pinned down than to hit them. As the sun began its westward descent, Penelope realized their situation was growing more desperate. Kyle would need feeding soon, and their water supply was limited. More concerning was the possibility that the other 3 riders might be circling around to attack from behind. "They're stalling," Owen muttered, coming to the same conclusion. "We need to move before we're surrounded." But where could they go? The fort was still miles away, and on foot with a baby they wouldn't get far before being overtaken. As if in answer to her unspoken question, the distant sound of a bugle floated on the air. Owen's head snapped up, his expression suddenly hopeful. "Cavalry," he said. From the fort, Penelope strained to hear, and yes, there it was again, closer now, accompanied by the drumming of many hooves. Their pursuers had heard it too. There was a hurried conference among them, then the sound of horses being mounted in haste. "They're running," Owen reported, watching through a gap in the rocks. "They know they can't explain their business to the military." Relief flooded through Penelope, so intense it left her light-headed. Kyle, sensing the change in her emotions, began to fuss, and she realized he was long overdue for a feeding. "Is it safe?" she asked, already opening her blouse to nurse him. Owen kept watch a moment longer, then nodded. "They're gone, and unless I'm mistaken, that's a patrol from Fort Pembina heading this way." Sure enough, within minutes, a column of cavalry appeared on the prairie, their blue uniforms unmistakable in the late afternoon sun. Owen stood and waved, drawing their attention to the rocky outcropping. The patrol leader, a young lieutenant, approached cautiously, his men fanning out behind him. "Identify yourselves," he called. "Owen Finley," Owen replied, keeping his hands visible. "My wife, Penelope, and our son are with me. We were traveling with a small wagon train when we were attacked by armed men." The lieutenant dismounted, studying them with a professional eye. "Where was this attack?" "About 10 miles southeast of here," Owen explained. "4 wagons, good people. The men who attacked were after us specifically." Personal matter. Understanding dawned in the officer's eyes as he noticed Penelope nursing Kyle. "Madam, are you all right?" he asked, his tone softening. "Yes, thanks to my husband," Penelope replied, the term coming naturally to her lips despite their pretense. "And to you and your men." The lieutenant nodded. "We were on routine patrol when we heard gunfire, glad we could be of service." He turned back to Owen. "We'll escort you to the fort. The commander will want a full report of this incident." As the soldiers helped them prepare to move, providing a fresh horse for Owen, and allowing Penelope and Kyle to ride in the small supply wagon that accompanied the patrol, Penelope felt the weight of the past weeks finally beginning to lift. They had come so close to disaster, yet somehow, against all odds, they had emerged unscathed. But as she watched Owen conferring with the lieutenant, a new anxiety took root in her heart. They had reached safety at last, their goal almost achieved. Soon they would cross into Canada, beyond Blackwood's reach. And then what? Would Owen continue with them, or would he return to the life that had been restored to him when his name was cleared? The answer to that question suddenly seemed more important than anything else in the world. Fort Pembina stood on the banks of the Red River, a sturdy collection of wooden buildings surrounded by a palisade wall. Though not as imposing as some of the larger forts further south, it represented safety and civilization after the wild uncertainty of the prairie. They arrived as dusk was falling, the fort's windows glowing with lamplight against the darkening sky. The lieutenant led them directly to the commander's office, where they recounted their story or a version of it, carefully edited to protect their true circumstances. Commander Wilson, a practical man with a salt and pepper beard and kind eyes, listened attentively, asking occasional questions but largely allowing them to speak uninterrupted. When they finished, he leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. "So these men were pursuing you because of some personal grudge against Mr. Finley," he clarified, looking between them. Owen nodded, maintaining the fiction they had agreed upon. "Yes, sir, an old dispute from my cattle driving days. I had hoped it was behind me, but apparently not." The commander's gaze suggested he suspected there was more to the story, but he didn't press the issue. "And your destination is Canada?" "Yes, sir," Penelope confirmed. "My husband has family in Manitoba. We're hoping to start a new life there, away from past troubles." Commander Wilson studied them for a moment longer, then seemed to come to a decision. "Very well. I'll send a patrol back to check on your companions in the wagon train, though if these men were truly only interested in you, they should be safe enough." He stood, signaling the end of the interview. "You're welcome to remain at the fort until you're ready to continue your journey. We have a small guest quarters for travelers, and the mess hall serves decent food." Not what you'd get at home, madam, but filling enough. Thank you, Commander, Owen said, shaking the man's hand. Your hospitality is appreciated. As a young corporal led them to the guest quarters, a simple building with 4 small rooms separated by thin walls, Penelope felt an odd mix of emotions. Relief at their safety ward with uncertainty about the future, and a growing awareness that their pretense as husband and wife would soon have to end. The room they were assigned was spare but clean, with a narrow bed, a small table with a basin and pitcher, and a rocking chair near the single window. The corporal, noticing Kyle, promised to have someone bring a cradle from the fort's small hospital. When they were finally alone, an awkward silence fell between them. Owen stood by the door as if unsure of his place in this more intimate setting. I'll find somewhere else to sleep, he offered, breaking the tension. Perhaps the barracks has a spare bunk. Penelope busied herself with settling Kyle, who had fallen asleep during their meeting with the commander. You don't have to go, she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. The bed is small, but she trailed off, suddenly embarrassed by what her words implied. Owen cleared his throat, equally uncomfortable. I think it's best if I maintain our arrangement from the trail, he said carefully. For propriety's sake, Penelope nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. Of course. Another silence fell, heavier than before. There were so many things Penelope wanted to say, questions she needed to ask about what would happen once they crossed the border. But the words stuck in her throat, held back by fear of the answers she might receive. A knock at the door saved them from further awkwardness. A young woman in an apron, the fort's cook, she explained, had brought them a tray with a simple supper and, as promised, a small wooden cradle for Kyle. After she departed, they ate in relative silence, the events of the day catching up with them. Penelope was bone-tired, every muscle aching from the hard ride and the tension of their escape. Owen looked equally exhausted, dark circles shadowing his eyes. You should rest, he said, noticing her stifled yawn. It's been a long day, Penelope nodded, grateful for the suggestion. What about you? I'll check in with the commander, see if there's any news about the wagon train, Owen replied, rising from his chair. And arrange for our passage across the border. The commander mentioned there's a regular ferry that crosses the Red River into Canadian territory. How soon can we leave? Penelope asked, trying to keep her voice neutral despite the pang his words caused. Owen hesitated. Day after tomorrow, most likely. The ferry runs on a schedule. He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to face her. Penelope, we should talk about what happens next. Her heart skipped at his serious tone. Yes, we should. But before he could continue, Kyle began to fuss, his little face scrunching up in preparation for a full-blown cry. The moment was lost as Penelope hurried to tend to him. We'll talk tomorrow, Owen said, a hint of regret in his voice. When you've had some rest. After he left, Penelope changed and fed Kyle, her mind whirling with all the things left unsaid between them. As she gently rocked the baby to sleep in,